Good afternoon. Apparently nobody can join at the allotted time this afternoon, but don't worry, I'm going to record this session anyway, and it may be a little longer because of the clash we had with other classes earlier in the week. I'm going to start with Unit 1 on the assessment process, and really to tell you what it's all about. So if I click on that and bring it up, if it does, quite slow working on my unit here. Here it comes now, I think. This is Unit 1. It's understanding the principles and practices of assessment. Basically, it's explaining the function of assessment and in learning and development, and the key concepts and principles within that process. The responsibilities the assessor has, and 1.4 is to identify the regulations and requirements relevant to the assessment in your own area of practice. These, of course, will differ from assessor to assessor, depending on what is actually being assessed. It can be anything from classroom assessment or assessment of work that's been produced, written work that's been produced and then passed on in the form of an assignment or an essay. Or it could be an actual practical piece of work for somebody who's doing a vocational course. It could be laying bricks, it could be joinery, it could be engineering, motor vehicle, it could be a range of things. So the regulations and requirements with regard to those individual things will be different, of course. The next bit is understanding different types of assessment, and we'll cover those in the PowerPoint I'll deliver shortly. Comparing the strengths and limitations of the assessment methods with reference to the needs of individual learners. Although the method of assessment will not change much for each individual element that's going to be assessed, there may be some special needs for learners that could have, I don't know, hearing problem or something of that nature, where other methods may be needed to be brought in to fulfill the needs of those learners. Understand how to plan the assessment. Now, that really is summarising the key factors to consider when planning an assessment. Evaluate the benefits of using a holistic approach to assessment, and explain how to plan an holistic approach, and then summarise the different types of risks that may be involved in the assessment in your own area of responsibility. Now, this again, this fourth one, 3.4, the types of risks that could be involved in a classroom are vastly different from the types of risks that would be involved working in a garage, for instance, or, I don't know, down a coal mine. Obviously, there are a whole host of issues there that need to be your own area of responsibility. Again, how to minimise those risks when planning the process, understand how to resolve learners and others in assessment. I'll just go back to something there about assessment planning. This is not just about the candidate actually being ready for assessment. I mean, there's obviously no point in going through the assessment process if the candidate is not ready. They will tell you when they're ready to, I can do this now, I want to be assessed on it, yeah? So that way you can do that. But then you've got to plan when you're going to do it, what time it will take, when you're going to do it, what you will need, what resources you're going to need, etc. If you're going to be in the classroom, it could be that you're going to need, it may be the student is going to give a presentation. So it'll have to be planned, equipment, projector, etc. To be there when you actually, the student does that delivery. It could be if a student or learner was in a working condition somewhere and he would need special tools or equipment, those need to be available. The resources that he would need to actually do that would have to be available at that time. So the planning is quite important. Explain the importance of involving the learner in the assessment process. Well, I've just covered that slightly by saying that, yeah, you've got the candidate or the learner will tell you when they are ready to be assessed on a certain process. because if you're just going to go in and say, well, you've been doing this a while now, I'm going to watch you do it, it's obviously not going to work. Summarise the types of information that should be made available to learners. He obviously should know the standards, what he's being assessed against, need to do. Peer and self-assessment can be used effectively if you get them involved, and this can only happen, of course, if you're in a classroom environment where you've got a number of students or learners in that class, then that can be quite useful. If you've got somebody that's working alone or doesn't get much chance to do that, then peer assessment is not really usable, but self-assessment is. And this is why I come back to the learner will tell you when they're ready to be assessed. Explain how assessment arrangements can be adapted to meet the needs of individual learners. Well, this I've brushed on before. It looks at learners with some sort of special need, or maybe that they cannot do a certain piece of work in their workplace, and it would need to be done in a college, maybe in a college workshop or something like that. So again, arrangements will have to be adapted to meet the needs of those individual learners. And all this, understand how to make assessment decisions. It isn't, because 5.1 it will say, have you got sufficient evidence there? Is it authentic? Is it the learner that actually produced it? Is it current, or was it done years ago? In other words, it may need to be brought up to date. How to ensure that assessment decisions are made against specific criteria, they're valid, they're reliable, and they're fair. Now that's the student side. This is the assessor's side. Yeah, he will look at a range of things, and the criteria will be quite specific. Usually it will say what has to occur or what has to be produced. And if it isn't, then your judgment decision will be that it's not yet achieved. It's not pass or fail, it's achieved or not achieved. And it may be that during an assessment, a whole part of it is achieved, but a small part of it isn't. So that's identified, and the unit wouldn't be granted until it was achieved. Yeah. That bit would then be assessed at a later date, and once that was cleared, then the whole unit could be signed off. So that's the bones of how the process goes on. Next, it moves on understanding the quality assurance of the assessment process, how the learner can summarise the quality assurance standardised procedure in their own area. Now, you will need to contact your own school. They will have their own documentation, and there will be their own quality assurance procedures that they take, that they lay down, that you will have to follow those. Summarise the procedures to follow in disputes concerning assessment and area of practice. These are laid down pretty well by the awarding body. If you've got a dispute, the learner would take it up with his assessor first. If he still wasn't satisfied at that point, it would go to the IQA. The IQA may not be able to make the decision. There may be some confusion. So he would need to go back to the awarding body, to the EQA, and say, look, we've got this issue, what do we do about it? Then they will make the decision from there. The candidate has the ability to go back to the awarding body himself separately, but in probably 35 years of assessing, I have never once known that happen. 7, the learner will understand how to manage information regarding to assessment, relating to the assessment. This is following procedures, managing the information relating to the assessment, and how the feedback and questioning within your assessment process contribute to the whole effort. If you a lot of things come in on here. If you've got things like data protection, you cannot divulge people's names and information to anybody. I mean, the assessment process is gathered between the learner and the assessor, and it stays between them. The next stage, IQA, is the only valid person that can be passed on to. They will share that information, or the assessor will share the information with the IQA and the candidate, and that is all. All the feedback that you give the candidate or to the learner has to be recorded, and any questioning or written questions as well, will contribute to knowledge evidence that will go with the particular process that's being assessed on. Again, there are legal issues. Again, data protection, procedures relevant to assessment, including those for confidentiality, health and safety and welfare. Those are the issues, or the only issues really, that you will come against in assessment. A lot of the time, it doesn't really raise its head, but occasionally you'll have health and safety or welfare issues. Sometimes this can be quite wide-ranging. As an assessor, you will get involved in all sorts of things. I give you an example. I had a student who was missing college. I was assessing him in the workplace, but he missed college on several occasions. And I found out that his mother had to work. She was on her own, and he had a young sister, and he had to stay behind to look after the young sister when his mother was at work on those particular days. Once I had found out what the problem was, we'd then be able to sort it, because the college in fact has a creche that it used for teachers and tutors, and I made arrangements for him to bring his young sister into college with him when he came in, and leave her with them until he finished. So again, you get involved in all sorts of issues that you don't really think you will at the start, but everything, people will surprise you. The contribution that technology can make to the assessment process, well, that has really taken over these days. Very few organisations will complete paper-based portfolios. It still occurs quite often, but it's getting less and less. Quite often now, evidence is being compiled on the electronic portfolios. Actually made its appearance now, and a lot of the time, the evidence can be provided by the learner directly to the assessor, and feedback given directly from the assessor back to the student very quickly indeed now, purely by email or by some transfer system that the company or the school may have set up. Moodle is a good example of that. I've mentioned this before, that you need to access Moodle. This recording, of course, that I'm doing now will be available on Moodle for you afterwards, because obviously nobody's been able to make it today at this time. So those can be accessed at any time. And it's the same with delivering essays or work. Written work can be put in electronically, and then the assessor can pick it up and respond very quickly. Again, we come to equality and diversity where it's appropriate. Bilingualism, if it's necessary in assessment, you may have to make arrangements where you would need an interpreter. I can't see that happening everywhere, but it does occur, and you need to be able to actually provide that as and when it comes up. Again, that could come down to learner with special needs adapting assessment. Yeah, you could need a reader, or you could need somebody to translate. Yeah. The value of reflective practice in continuing professional development in the assessment process. Well, to be fair, this is no different than the teaching process. If you value the work that you're doing, you will reflect on it yourself, and you will say at the end, that went pretty well. I think I got that off pat. Everybody seemed to be happy, etc. Or you say the opposite. I mean, I did a recording for the earlier lesson, and I was not happy with it. and I would probably come back to that and do something about it. So it's not really much different in the assessment process than any other process. It's the value of looking at what you've done within the confines of the school or the company that you're working for, and make those decisions about what you need to do and any changes that you could make. So all those are the whole of that process. What I want to do is run through a number of I've lost you. So, there we go. We open it. It's bad enough with me pressing the wrong buttons. It's actually taking its time to close down so I can open new. What I'll do is look at we can decide to open up itself. This is a PowerPoint process I put together quite some time ago. I've modified it slightly, but it's practical academic assessment. The overall aim of today's session is to give an overview of assessment and relate it to the job role of assessors and teachers. You'll be able to describe what an assessment is, understand how it fits into the context of national frameworks, be able to describe the elements of the unit and have a good understanding of portfolio building and construction, and understand what valid and reliable evidence is. We can leave that one. This is what I do in class, where we do an introduction and everybody introduces themselves again. 2 chapter assessment, an MBQ is a vocational award, and it's on a competence-based qualification working towards national standards. National standards are like the sector skill potential in any particular area. Academic assessment is also made against specific criteria which are placed by the awarding body. In your case, we're using NCFE, and they have laid down the standards for your assessment. They didn't lay the standards down, that's not true, to be honest. They have put forward the standards under their banner. The standards have been laid down by the training and development lead body for the whole industry. Same with engineering or motor vehicle or construction. They have their own sector councils who will lay down the standards required for each individual skill or competence that's got to be achieved. The awarding bodies such as EdExcel, CFE, ATHE, a whole host of them, City and Guilds is another, they take those standards and they offer them under their banner. In this case, we're using NCFE. What are criteria? Designed and written by the industry which they relate and therefore recognised by employers in that industry. NBQs are qualifications which confirm a person's ability to carry out a particular job role. Academic qualifications are also written to achieve specific learning objectives by nationally registered awarding bodies. Just mentioned that, of course. They come in different levels. In the national standard level in UK runs from entry level 1, entry level 2, entry level 3, then we get level 1, which is here, level 2. Level 1 recognises competence in a range of work activities which are primarily routine and predictable or provide a broad foundation. Level 2 recognises competence in a broader and more demanding range of work, and the activities involve greater responsibility. Can it, but not necessarily. Level 3 recognises competence in skilled areas and involves performance in a broad range of work activities, including many that are complex and non-routine. Higher academic qualifications start at this level. Supervisory competence may be required at this stage. Now, to give you some examples of that, if, say, an apprentice has done a full apprenticeship in engineering, he will be considered a skilled person once he has achieved a level 3. He may have, in fact, achieved a level 4 in his academic qualification, which will have to run alongside the apprenticeship. It could be an HNC or an HND. So that's involved with the two. The process is quite wide. Level 4 recognises competence in the performance of professional and academic activities, including supervision or management. Level 5, substantial personal capability, autonomy, management of others, allocation of resources, analysis, diagnosis, planning and evaluation. Teaching practical or academic subjects, part of a first degree. To give you some example, level 4 is sort of higher national certificate level. Level 5 is really the first year of a bachelor's degree. So you've got level 5 and 6 would be bachelor's, then you've got level 7 and 8, which would take you to masters. And that is the top level. Not in the UK, in England and Wales. Scotland have a slightly different set, but we won't go into those at this stage. Again, I've mentioned before, your qualification part, the learning and development levels 3, 4 and 5. The awarding body for your qualification, in this case, is NCFE. The level of this qualification is 3, which I would, as I've said previously, is equivalent to, say, a skilled person once they've achieved the end of an apprenticeship. Lots of times, or in many occasions, where a person has become skilled or achieved that level, they can then actually become an assessor. After a certain amount of practice and experience, they can then become an assessor in that particular area. I'm not going to cover that because we can't discuss anything. There's no discussion on here today, but it's an exercise in training assessment methods. But assessment can leave teachers and learners confused. Assessment versus examination, for instance. Exam-based courses are of a particular length. This type of course incorporates a syllabus clearly defining the technical knowledge to be covered. Assessment can be open-ended on the other hand, with assessment, and it's not independent really of course of time, where you've got specific classrooms. In these cases, I can deliver this course to you now. You may not watch it till next week. The assessment has no syllabus. It's got a list of criteria, all learning objectives in which knowledge is embedded. A standard. These are fixed, they are not mine, these are fixed statements on a particular thing. A standard is a measure of a person's competence agreed by the awarding body. It describes what has to be achieved. A unit is a chunk of activity large enough to be separate on its own. Units can be large enough to be accredited separately. You are doing 2 units in this case. It's unit 1 and but those 2 units form a complete award. Again, the assessed units is 2 units and constitute a complete award. A unit is made up of a number of elements. An element is the smallest chunk of activity that can be credited towards the achievement of a unit of competence. A number of elements make a unit. You will see some of them in terms of learning objectives are then broken down. You might have 3, 4, 5 learning objectives. I think there are 6 in this award, or in this unit, I should say. Those objectives are then broken down into smaller elements. As you go, you get 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 2.1, 2. Etc. Yeah. But each of those will have a specific part of the unit to which it pertains. Performance criteria indicate the standard of what has to be done, and it describes the activities relating to specific elements of competence. Now that will be for practical-based qualifications. It will say exactly what has to be done. For academic qualifications, this is where it talks about you'll see things like indicative content, where it will tell you the sort of thing that you should be discussing or putting into your output. Range statements. This will have for practical work. It will say you have to achieve a certain amount of activities, and it will specify what the unit, which unit or element that applies to, the competence applies to. But it will say, like, to give you an example from my engineering background, it will say you have to do this and this, or it will give you 5 options, and you'll have to do at least 2 of them that will meet the range. But it doesn't matter which 2, you can do any of them. Academic content may refer to indicative content, as I've mentioned, or amplification. Sometimes it's looked at as illumination or amplification, where it will say you have to do this. These are the sort of things that it's discussing. That is why those are available to you on Moodle, on all the units that are being done, both on the teaching units and on the assessor and IQA ones. And at some point during the series, I will put the actual unit up with the things you have to achieve, and I will have a list of suggested evidence, which is a little bit clearer than either range or amplification. It tells you really what you need to be putting in there. Performance evidence is assessed by examination of products, observation of the process, and the work done to achieve a standard. In terms of practical work, that can be observing somebody, I don't know, a motor vehicle might be changing a wheel or a tyre. So it'll be an observed practice. I'll just bring something in here a bit early because we'll mention it later on. You can use things like if you were an assessor that was assessing apprentice technicians in the garage proprietor is with the learner most of the time. If he has observed him completing work for him that is satisfactory, like changing a wheel or tyre while you weren't there, he can make a witness statement out to that effect, providing he understands the standards. Then be a piece of evidence that be produced to achieve rather than observed directly. With teaching, it's a little bit different. That can be used, the same thing can be used. I've done that myself with one person, or one of the teachers that was working for me, had to be observed by his tutor for his PGCE. Unfortunately, the tutor couldn't be there. I did the observation and signed it off and filled in the documentation, and the awarding, oh, not the awarding body, but the college that he was working with were happy to do that. But again, it's easier to do a teaching observation or a presentation. Of course, those of you that I did the observations for, I've got copies of those, and those will be available on Moodle for you to put into your portfolio, or your electronic portfolio that you put together. Again, knowledge evidence comes from the examination of a product, the observation of a process in response to questioning. It is collected when performance evidence does not fully cover the specified range. Quite often, on practical courses when I've been assessing work done, I could say afterwards, yes, but what if this had happened, what would you have done then? Yeah, elicited the answer from there that would satisfy me that they had a full understanding. So assignments can be given more than usually. If health and safety is involved, there will be a health and safety assignment that has to be completed by a learner to fulfil the requirement, fully fulfil the requirements of the standard. And assignments are obviously written to meet learning objectives. For those of you that have used any sort of assignment-based projects, there will be, again, indicative content, and it will even be usually awarding bodies will put guidelines for assessors. Now, quite often I will use those guidelines for assessors to give to my learners, so they know exactly what I'm going to be looking at. Portfolio, yeah, is the evidence built up to prove competence as a learner, or in the case of vocational assessor, that's you, a competent assessor. Yeah, the role of the assessor. Oh, what is it? Well, this is, again, I do, you could do this if you wanted to, not necessarily, but prepare a job description for an assessor. Your school would probably have one of those already, so they'll be hitting exactly what you need for that. But tutor assessors should be occupationally competent, trained, learning, development, lead body standards, and academically experienced and qualified in their field. So at the moment, you'll be occupationally competent and you'll be academically or experienced qualified in your field. The process in the middle, trained to learning and development, lead body standards, is what you are doing now with this award. So yeah, that's the bit that completes the requirements for an assessor. Must be competent in the skills and abilities of assessing, qualified to carry out assessment, which you're not yet, of course, to use the standards correctly and make assessment judgments. Sometimes licensed. When I was an engineer, the Engineering Training Authority, and the lead body for the engineering industry and lay down the standards, insisted that all assessors had to be qualified before they could assess. They must have a license number, and every time you sign a piece of paper or click an electronic box, it has to have your assessment or your license number applied to it, so it's directly, accountable to yourself. Not always do that. And they had a further instruction that while I was training to be assessor before I got my qualification, any work or any assessments that I signed had to be countersigned by a qualified assessor. Not all early bodies insist on that, but some do, so I'm just making you aware if it comes up. assess candidates against performance criteria in skills and knowledge. Carries out a range of methods, including observation, questionnaire and discussion. Using these methods, we can assess the whole qualification. Problems, remedies of assessment. Inappropriate assessor, change to one that's occupationally competent. This is very important, to be honest. Some people think once they've got the assessor qualification, they can assess basically anything. That's not true. You can broaden what you can assess by having an understanding of the criteria involved. But in a lot of cases, you must be competent in the area which you assess. If you're an IQA, then that doesn't really apply. You have to have a good knowledge of the subject, but you do not have to be occupationally competent. You just need to understand the process to see that it's been done correctly. Special needs or lack of basic skills, give support, use oral questions, offer training. Find ways to communicate. Give candidates support and reassurance. Lack of management support, educate them through discussion. Quite often, if you are working with a company, a lot of the managers don't always see exactly the point of what you're trying to do, and sometimes you have to educate them. Problems and remedies of assessment, again, the venue, resources and materials, prepare beforehand. This is what I said before. There's quite a lot to do in the preparation for an assessment. It's not something you do off the cuff. It's something that has to be planned and prepared for. Confidentiality, you've got to understand and gain the candidate's trust. They've got to work with you to achieve the level of competence that they need to do. Not clear about the rules, discuss it with your internal verifier or IQA, and any other assessors will give you support in any circumstance. If you're new to doing something, and there are people around who've been doing it a while, ask them. So they'll be honest. Usually, I have found, quite honestly, in many years in this range of work, people are only too glad to help. Very few are the ones that will ignore you, and you just keep away from them. You can use simulation, arrange time to train and assess. That's where basically looking at practical operations where you can come off a job and simulate what you're doing off the job and then do some training with it. And once you're happy with them, then they can be assessed on the process itself. Again, equipment availability. I mentioned this earlier as well. If it's a practice assessment, you need to have the equipment there to do the job. Quite simple, straightforward. There can be misleading questions. Clear and relevant questions only. It's no use going all around the houses. You just need to look at what's being asked for and keep those questions specifically to that operation. List the advantages and disadvantages of using the following methods of assessment. Observation. Obvious advantages. You can see exactly what's going on. You can see how something is being achieved. You can rate it against the standards that are being laid down for it to be achieved. That is got very little disadvantages, except that the assessor must be present and everything must be set up ready for that observation to take place. So it's more time consuming perhaps. Witness testimony. These are great, good advantages, you can use them. It's not always the best practice. If you are in a work-based situation and it is a supervisor or an employer who's giving the witness testimony, then it's more useful because those people are not likely to actually say somebody's good enough or pass them if they're not, because at the end of the day they won't be able to do the job that they want to do. So witness testimony is useful in those instances. In others, where it may be a peer that's doing it, you would have to scrutinise it a little more clearly. Oral questions. Oral questions are fine for small details, but not for major ones. They would have to be questions, but again, you'd have to have a record of them. Oral questions can only be used when you're not quite sure about something and you just want to confirm what you already think you know. Simulation cannot be assessed, really. In very rare circumstances, it could be accepted, but simulation is more of a training operation where some additional training is needed on a particular part of the job or something of that nature. And then once the standard's been achieved, then they can actually do the job and be assessed in the normal way. Assignments are good because it really puts or proves real good understanding of the subject that they're being assessed on. Working documents are great because, especially in a sense, because that way you can use drawings, you can use calculations, you can use a whole host of things the candidate has had to use to achieve the standard that they've met. Working documents are also useful in the industry we're in ourselves, because as I've mentioned to many of you, the documents that you fill in on a daily basis for the students or learners you've got, they are the basis of your evidence for this plot. These are the things that the working documents that you use on the assessment process and teaching processes and everything else that you do. Those working documents are your evidence that you can do the job. Got that one there. Valid. Is it a valid piece of work? Is it theirs? Right. So valid and authentic are pretty much the same. Does it meet the standards if it's valid? Authentic is at the student, doesn't it? Is it up to date? Is it consistent? Does it happen regularly? Yeah, can they regularly produce the standard required? And is there enough? Some of the things, certainly on practical assessment, have to be achieved at least 2 or 3 times to be considered to achieve the standard in a particular area. But what is it? It's the assessment is the process of making judgments based on the evidence collected about competence and understanding. To make these judgments to national standards in the past, you had to hold D32, D33, TDLB awards. 32 and 33 are replaced by learning developments, units 1 and 2, and incorporated in some cases into the level 5 teaching award. But again, as you were doing, they're being done as separate units, standalone. The evidence for your award must have arisen from real performance as a tutor assessor and from actual documents produced. Now, I've mentioned this before. Excuse me. It's no good putting copies of the documents that you use and put blank copies in. They must be actual working documents of particular students that you've got, or copies of them. Maybe you have to take the name of the student out, so that it does remain anonymous. What is the purpose of this part of your award? It's designed to give workshop-based tutors or assessors the skills to assess competence-based awards, and also those, excuse me, that form part of a larger award. It also gives teachers the skills to assess academic work. So you're going to develop plans for assessing competence with candidates or learners. Evidence against criteria to make assessment decisions. Provide feedback and support to candidates' assessment decisions, and contribute to the internal quality assurance process. A lot of the time, people will look at a whole range of things and not really look at the detail of what needs to be done. So developing a plan, assessing the competence, needs to be done thoroughly. Once that's been collected, the judgment of the evidence against the criteria to make the assessment decision. Has it completed, has it achieved the criteria, or is still some work to do? Not a pass or fail, that's the main point. It's not a pass or fail, it's a not yet achieved. Provide feedback and support. Most of the academic work, I tend to put comments into the actual script itself, or at the end of each section, I'll put a comment in red, which says, yes, it was good, I achieved it, or it may say, what you could have done is add this, or this could have been, you need to discuss that, or there is no mention of this, or you did not analyse whatever. I find that that type of feedback, as well as the actual formal sheet that says, yes, that's achieved or that's not achieved, much more useful to the candidate as feedback. And as an internal quality assurer, the external quality assurer likes to see that sort of thing, because it shows that you've looked at it properly and made your decisions from the work itself. So you're contributing to the internal quality assurance process, yeah? Because all your assessment decisions will be looked at by your IQA to make sure. And of course, the IQA, I'll come on to in other units that you'll do later, will develop meetings with assessors to make sure that everybody's on the same page. If you are developing plans for assessing competence, assessing both performance and knowledge against agreed standards, giving candidates feedback on your assessment decisions, and contributing to the internal quality assurance process. End of day one. End of part one. Okay, I'm going to close the meeting now, and I will pick up from this on our next occasion, which will be on Tuesday, the 7th of the 3rd, and it will be from 11 till approximately 11:30. Thanks for your attention, and again, I'll remind you this is recorded for you.